Hey, it's Dana. Today I'm going to make a very simple one-piece silicone rubber mold with a plaster jacket. Now I'm showing you my mixing technique, and I'm going to show it to you a few times during this project because it's really important. It's important to get a good mix. So I'm mixing up a small batch of silicone, about 150 grams, with 15 grams of extra fast catalyst, and that's going to be my first layer on the mold. Now here's this cow sculpture, and I'm brushing the first layer of silicone all over the surface. I'm careful not to bump the ferrule of the brush into the clay because I don't want to damage the clay while it's under the rubber. But I am brushing it on there fairly vigorously, making sure to get an even coat over the whole surface. Once I have an even coat on the sculpture, then I use my air tool to blow the bubbles out of the surface and force the silicone down into all the crevices. And I can use whatever silicone is left to fill in some areas. Now for my mixing technique, I always do what I call an inversion. So I measure out my catalyst, and then I put the silicone in, and I mix it in that cup. And then I'm going to take it and I'm going to dump it into another cup and mix it again. And that way I'm sure to never have uncatalyzed silicone in my mold. Works every time. Alright, my second layer is about 200 grams of silicone. Again with the extra fast catalyst. I like to use the extra fast catalyst so that I can put on a layer every hour and a half or so. The second layer goes on just like the first. Smooth and fast. I'm using the GT Products 6142. It's a mid-grade condensation cured silicone. Now here's my mixing technique again, but this time I'm going to mix a slightly larger batch because I'm going to put some thixotropic additive in it. I'm also using the yellow fast catalyst. This is going to give me a little more working time. So I'm doing a 400 gram batch. I measure out 40 grams of catalyst, 400 grams of silicone. I mix it thoroughly in one cup. I dump it into a second cup. I mix it again. And then I'm going to add about a gram of the thixo. Now this layer goes on thick and covers the whole thing. It's kind of like frosting cake. You're looking to build up some thickness on the rubber, especially on the thin spots. The high areas tend to get thin as the first couple of layers run off of the surface. So you want to take extra care to put extra silicone on those high spots. After this is set up for about 30 minutes, then I'll tamp it down with a wet rag. Alright, now it's time for my last pass of silicone, and I'm back to the ultra-fast red catalyst, again with a small batch of about 150 grams. And again, I'm going to mix it in one cup, and then dump it into a second cup, mix it again before I put it on the surface of my mold. Here's a quick tamping of the thixo layer before I put the final layer of silicone on. It's important that the surface be smooth so you don't have a craggy surface that can make it hard for the mold to sit properly in the rigid jacket or mother mold. That's why I like to put a final thin pass on. Okay, I like to clean up a little bit first. Sometimes I get a little bit messy. Denatured alcohol will clean up any uncatalyzed silicone that happens to be on your work surface. It's real easy, cleans up nice and easy. Alright, I'm going to make my mother mold in Puritan pottery plaster. This is a good mid-weight plaster. It's It's very easy to use, very forgiving. I put plaster into the water until I have a little mountain in the middle, and then I let it sit for about 2 minutes. I'm also going to soak some hemp fiber in water. That's going to be my reinforcement. Now, while that plaster is soaking for about 3 minutes, I'm going to trim up the edges of my rubber. This is going to give me a good clean edge between the plaster and the rubber, so it's real clear where the mold sits. I'm also going to use a little Vaseline around the edge just to make sure that the mother mold comes off the surface easily. Now I'm mixing the plaster with my hand, and I'm just squeezing it and making sure that it's even and there are no dry spots. And then I'm going to put the plaster directly onto the silicone with my hand, but I'm not rubbing it, I'm laying it on the surface. I'm looking to build up at least a 1/4 inch of thickness. So I'm kind of scooping it and drizzling it onto the surface. And then I'm going to put my hemp fiber in while the plaster is still wet, and then I'm going to work that into the surface. The hemp fiber is what gives it strength. Now I decided to give it a little extra strength by adding some paint sticks into it. So I'm going to mix up a second batch of plaster, and while that's setting up, I'm going to arrange my reinforcement in the mother mold. I'm going to hold those paint sticks down with a little more hemp fiber. You can put conduit in it, you can put wood, you can put rebar, you can put all thread, whatever works. Sometimes I put the plaster on with a brush because it allows me to control the thickness a little bit more. And once I've got all that final layer of hemp fiber worked in, then I'm going to clean up the edges. And I've decided I'm going to give myself some little platforms so that the mold sits flat when I have it upside down and on the bench. So I've mixed up another batch of plaster, this time a little bit thicker, and I'm just layering up some little plateaus of plaster. And I'm looking down the line and trying to make them kind of even. It doesn't have to be perfect because I can use shims to get the mold perfectly level. I'm using my plaster tool to feather those edges in. Then I'm going to use a piece of ABS plastic and a 2x4 to bridge across those platforms to get them even. Alright, the plaster is set up. Time to clean up my edges and do the demold. Now you don't want to pry because you can break it. You just want to lift and create space. I'm using some shims and my scraper, and it comes right off quite easily. When I demold the rubber, I loosen all the edges first before I start peeling it off. I'm also going to put some Vaseline inside my plaster. That's going to help any material that I cast into the mold to keep from sticking to the plaster mother mold. Now I can peel that rubber off, and it sits very nicely right in my plaster jacket. And there you have it, simple one-piece rubber mold.